Hello and welcome back. More Islam terrorism, but thankfully actually thwarted by the UK authorities. So we have St. Paul's bomb plot, amongst other plots. The IS supporter Sophia Sheikh pleads guilty. Not her birth name, evidently, by her picture here. Fun fact, as an aside, that redheads are most likely to be recruited by ISIS, or IS as they are now known. So thankfully we could thwart this in time, but it does go to show that there is still a very active presence within the country, and it suggests also that it isn't just people from foreign origins, evidently, it is just the ideology. It is not the ethnic origin that is important, it is what people think. That is what is most important, and I think should be reiterated as much as possible, that it isn't racism or xenophobia, it is Islamophobia. Why is it Islamophobia? Well, fear of Islam. I think that's fair enough, that we are afraid of Islam to a certain extent at least, but most of all it's just saying, well, you can't be tolerant of intolerance. Even if somebody buys into it as a native Brit, the same rules apply to everyone, from the king or the queen down to the peasant. So a supporter of the banned Islamic State terror group has admitted plotting to blow herself up in a bomb attack on St. Paul's Cathedral. Sophia Sheikh of Hayes, West London, went on a reconnaissance trip to scope out the London landmark and a hotel. The 36-year-old, born Michelle Ramsden, I hope that's not dead naming, was arrested after asking an undercover police officer to supply bombs. At the Old Bailey, the Muslim convert admitted preparing an act of terrorism and will be sentenced in May. Yes, the BBC actually mentions she is a Muslim convert. Over the 2 months before her arrest in October 2019, Sheikh built up a relationship with two undercover officers who were posing as a husband and wife extremist team. She messaged one of them via an encrypted social media app. Let's not mention WhatsApp. So she seemed to be at least slightly illiterate, but that's to be expected if somebody buys into such a barbaric ideology as of this. You can't be of sound mind, otherwise you would see through it immediately. So, I want to kill a lot, she told the officer. I would like to do church. A day like Christmas or Easter could kill more. Like we've seen, of course, not so long ago, the attacks around the world. I always send threats, but I want to make threats real. She sent her a picture of St. Paul's Cathedral to the officer and wrote, I would like to do this place for sure. I would like bomb and shoot till death. I really would love to destroy that place and the kafir. Enemies of IS there. Yes, kafir as in enemies of Islam, non-believers, essentially. Strike them at the neck where you find them. 939 in the Quran. That's always a fun little quote to have. If we're putting up quotes of the Quran, why not put the stuff at the end of the Quran, which is supposed to take precedent over the beginning bits of the Islam, as in chronological order, that Muhammad essentially gets enlightened, apparently, as the Quran goes on, and therefore the bits at the end supersede the bits at the beginning. And of course, at the beginning, nobody really knows who he is, so he has to lay low, and that's where taqiyya comes from, which is lying in order to further Islam. And then at the end, when he isn't persecuted and set upon, he can then be more honest and barbaric with his intentions, and that's where the idea of the kafir and strike them at the neck where you find them, and the end of the Quran is the juicier bits, of course. And so if you wish to say that Islam is a religion of peace, then you have to take the bits earlier on and say that basically he just got a bit crazy later on, and it was only the bit at the beginning which was true. The Quran does contradict itself quite a lot, and at the very least, of course, Muhammad apparently met with the angel Gabriel, I believe, but when he first met him, he thought that he was the devil, because of the torment that he was put through when he was speaking to that deity, or ethereal being. And it was only when he spoke to, I believe it was Aisha, his wife at the time, first wife, get him while they're young, 6 years old, of course, that she then said, oh no, that must be an angel, not the devil. And the religion seemed to sprout from there. So they say that Sheikh was caught thanks to a combination of critical pieces of the picture of her extremism that came together over time. First, there was mounting intelligence of her extremist ideology. She stopped going to a mosque because she suspected she would be reported for her views. And that's nice, if true. So I'll take them at the word and say, yes, well done, because this is a critically important bit. Some mosques, of course, in the UK and across the world, in fact in Saudi Arabia they have monitoring for this reason, that they are concerned with the extremism that is mentioned and taught and preached within their mosques by their imams. But if we can actually have the moderate Muslims calling out the extremist parts of their community, that is vital in having a reform of Islam into a way that actually conforms with Western ideals. Of course, you're free to do in your home whatever you want to do, and this is very important. If they can then integrate into the West even more by stopping halal slaughter, and yes, the same goes for the Jews with kosher, yes, of course, and actually following the law in preventing the unnecessary suffering to animals when there is a more humane way to end their lives, then they should do that as well. But hey, baby steps first of all, and if, and it's a big if her mosque community were to report her for the extremist ideology, which they haven't, but the fear was there nonetheless, which is good, then that is a definite important turning point and should be lauded, and everybody should be encouraged to do the same. Not just for Islam, although they are the main culprits, of course, but for any community, that they should be reporting anybody that they are concerned about being such an extremist, such a radical, and they plan to murder people. Same goes across the political spectrum, across race. It supersedes all ideology and the like. That is an underlying principle, that if somebody wishes to violate the non-aggression principle, that is to cause harm unprovoked, then they should be reported. And thankfully, the police did act accordingly when they had the concerns. They didn't arrest her preemptively, they did not remove her freedom, they did instead play along, and after they had sufficient evidence, and before she could cause any harm, they swooped in to detain her. So, props to the British government, and the police force in particular. Our intelligence agency is supposed to be the best in the world anyway. At least it has been for the past few hundred years, so hopefully it still is, and well done. Please continue to do what you are doing. So she included a photo here with the hashtag of the Netherlands, as it happens. So he said, "We have come to slaughter you and exterminate the kafir. The terror is now here." And that is, of course, the idea given by the more radical versions who think that the population must be destroyed, whereas other more moderates think, well, hang on, we don't actually need to kill the non-believers because we will outbreed them within a couple of generations anyway, and we then will be the majority and be able to force our will onto the minority. And that's why you see various Islamic political groups popping up around Europe, of course. So she converted to Islam in 2007 after being impressed by the kindness of her Muslim neighbours, but later became isolated and apparently rejected mainstream Islam. She began to call the extremist violent ideology of IS and other jihadist groups, and by 2016 she stopped attending mosques. She was also reported to the government's Prevent programme. So it seems that, yes, the more you buy into it, the more extreme you get, given that if you are a fundamentalist of Islam, it does encourage you to perform such barbaric acts. I don't think that's controversial. I mean, that is legitimate if you read exactly what the Quran says. The argument against it is to say we have reformed since then, and fair enough, more power to you. In a police interview, Sheikh admitted posting extremist material and plotting a bomb attack, although she said she might not have gone through with it. Well, that's just covering up after the fact. In court, she pleaded guilty to the preparation of terrorist acts and dissemination of terrorist publications. Mr. Justice Sweeney ordered reports ahead of sentencing on 11th of May. So this is St. Paul's itself, of course, which took longer than the original architects to build when they actually had a vision for the future and weren't just for the here and the now. So in November, Neil Basu, head of counter-terrorism policing, said the UK's counter-terrorism policing team had about 800 live counter-terrorism investigations, and said that 24 attack plots had been thwarted since the Westminster attack in March 2017. So props to them for being able to stop that many attacks, but it is also very disconcerting as to why it happens in the first place. That the prevention is better than the cure, of course, and there seems to be much more of a cure than a prevention. You do need to tackle the underlying problem sooner rather than later. Otherwise, just putting a band-aid on a bullet hole ain't gonna cut it. And if you lose the community cohesion and the things that are important, the values that we hold near and dear in the West and in civilized society, since the Enlightenment at least, yes, of course, that the Spanish Inquisition was a terrible time in Catholic history, and we have reformed the religion, and most of us have moved away from it since, maybe to our decrement instead of actual improvement, then the same needs to happen to Islam. And if it can't happen, then there is no place for it in a civilized society. Just to put it bluntly. But until we can get to the underlying issues, until we can say you need support, you need the enlightened individuals to be able to explain away the problems of this. You need it done on a logical, rational basis from an early age, and sustained to explain why this kind of ideology, this kind of terror mentality will not work in the world. It will never achieve great success. It will only cause harm to yourself and others. It will always be a problem. So, for what it's worth, to everybody watching and to anybody you wish to share it with, just remember that the greatest joy you will get in life is through making a change. Being noticed, being observed, being appreciated. The simplest way to do that is, of course, to tear things down. And that's where these people get their ideas from, that tearing things down, they will have an effect, and that makes them feel important. But if you want the best of the best feelings, then you make your change through having a positive impact on the world. You do make changes. You are noticed. You will have enemies because of it, of course. If you're building something, you will always have haters. But if you do something worthwhile, the intrinsic feeling of achievement, as well as the extrinsic feeling of gratitude and appreciation by those around you, will be better than anything you could imagine. And that is where you will get your happiness and fulfillment from. So, until next time, have a good one and be a positive force for change in the world.